Essentially, NASA approached Kronos back around the millennium to select a composer to create a work based on the recordings made by Professor Donald Gurnett. All the recordings that were made on those Voyager trips were made by Donald Gurnett. But I guess they'd never seen the light of day. They'd just been in his studio. So they got the idea to maybe somehow create a piece out of these and approached Kronos. And Kronos approached me. We had a wonderful beginning to this project. David Harrington and I flew down to Florida for a launch of one of the shuttles, space shuttles. It was perfectly timed so that we could sit in the grandstand with all the generals and everybody watching this amazing event, which seeing one of those huge rockets take off is pretty awesome. It shakes the ground, it shakes your sternum, it shakes everything. You realize it's a lot of wasted resources. Put these big heavy metal ships up in the air, but on the other token, it's such an achievement of mankind to have done this, to have actually launched into space. So that was what really got me started, was going there and watching a launch, getting to have a tour of NASA and being able to talk to some of the astronauts and watch the assembled parts of the space station being put together. It was really a great way to start the whole project. Major event that happened while I was writing The Sun Rings was 9/11. I'd been writing for about a month or something when 9/11 happened. When that event happened, I couldn't write anymore for quite a while. I just lost the incentive, for the piece, and I put it on the back burner. And then when the idea started coming back to me, I realized that the piece had to not only be about the universe or the solar system or, cosmic space, it had to have a humanity aspect to it. So that's when I decided to put the choir in, so to connect Earth with space as humans, so that we're always going to be humans when we're out there. We'll be behaving like humans, making decisions like humans. So I wanted that aspect to be in the piece. Before that, I hadn't considered using a choir. When Dr. Donald Garnett gave me these cassettes, I went back to Iowa to have meetings with him. He had these cassettes in a shoebox. He just handed me this shoebox. I hope they were copies. And I took them home, and I spent a lot of time going through the cassettes, listening into the sounds, the raw sounds as they were. They were very interesting sounds, but very gritty and all kind of hard to listen to for a long time, because there's a lot of distortion and noise, or sounds like distortion. Apparently, they're spectrographs. The first recordings that they made, they're not audio, and they had to be translated to the audio range. So these spectrographs were what these tapes were made from. That's what Donald Gurnett explained to me. I listened to them a lot. I started hearing melodies in them. I started hearing motives in them, and I let them suggest a lot of the music. Probably nobody else would hear the same thing I heard in them. They were helping me. My good friend David DeVoren, who had been doing a lot of technical work for me, I approached him to make me instrument banks of these sounds. So like one percussion bank, one kind of woodwind-like bank, one brass-like bank. I mean, we didn't talk about it in those terms, but that's what they ended up being like. So he took all these cassettes, and made sample instrument for me that I could then use to compose with for the audio backing track. I personally have always been attracted to the long journey in music, with lots of different stopovers and different viewing points in the work. I think that allows the composer and the listener to experience many more dimensions in the music as the music travels on through its journey, whatever it's going to be. It's going to touch on relationships to other parts of the music, and it's just an opportunity to create a larger vista. In Sun Ring's case, as I recall, there aren't really relationships between the movements themselves. I worked on them as individual movements. They were all quite different, but they were all drawn from this shoebox of cassettes. So for me, that was the thing that tied them all together. I was imagining Kronos in a spaceship cruising by Saturn. Sometimes when I'd hear these things, I'd actually get these visions of Kronos traveling in space. It really helped me to try to bring out, the seriousness and the whimsy of what we were working with. In a sense, it's all a big cosmic joke, right? I mean, through our art, we try to figure out what our relationship is to this big cosmic joke. It works very much kind of like a concerto. So they have to be balanced. The materials on the tape are related to what materials I've written. As I said, a lot of the motives and melodies and that I used in Sunrays were suggested to me by listening to these audio samples that Donald Gurnett made. The more I listened to them, the more I would hear musical motives and melodies in these tapes. What I've written for Kronos and what the audio backing track materials are have to be balanced. That requires collaboration with the sound production people here. I didn't know what we were doing, actually. It was just, living in an era, each one, you're just relating to what's going on, surviving as a musician. Looking back on it, it was a very fertile period. A lot of ideas were happening. At least we all felt they were new ideas. Of course, nothing, I guess, is new, but the fact that composers were starting to form their own groups and play their own music. But the idea that a composer would be a performer and have his group and try to realize his ideas in that way, instead of just being a composer who sits home and writes for a symphony orchestra. It was more like this is the laboratory for composers. I think that period had a lot of that kind of thinking in it. King's Place, I've actually played there, so I think it'll be a nice venue for. I played with George Brooks and Talvin Singh. We had a trio tour of Europe one year, and we ended up at King's Place, our last concert. Thank you for reviving Sun Rings with a new face, a new body, a new soul.